Um, Thank you very much for that introduction. This presentation is very much a work in progress. And as you've said, Fasil, it's a part of my Masters of Research on Africa and the African Diaspora with the University of Chichester. This presentation will briefly address the background to encounters between Africans and Chinese on the borders of China pre-20th century before addressing the most important part, which is the African-Chinese engagements between 1900 and 1950. It will then look at how these engagements are memorialized in Africa and Asia, and a conclusion will bring these strands together. For the sake of time, some details have been omitted and complex military actions have been perhaps oversimplified. So for any military historians out there, I do apologize. Let me go to my first slide. Oops, what's going on? Okay, here we go. The Chinese probably first encountered Africans as soldiers at the Battle of Talas River between the Arab Abbasid Empire and the Chinese Tang Empire in 750 CE, near the border between present-day Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. The Battle of Macau in 1622 was the only actual battle fought between two European powers on the Chinese mainland. The Dutch Governor-General said, "The Portuguese beat us off from Macau with their slaves. It was not done with any soldiers, for there were none in Macau." This 19th century monument at Victoria Garden in Macau commemorates that battle where Africans defended the Portuguese against the Dutch. "262 years later, the Sino-French war with the Tyrolese Algerian was where the Tyrolese Algerian were deployed in the Tonkin campaign against the Chinese. And there were a number of Senegalese soldiers in this event too. This was actually on China's border with what is now the northern part of Vietnam. Africans in Asia before the Second World War. Before 1930, there were already African soldiers from Mozambique in Portuguese Timor, Macau, and there were North Africans and Senegalese, particularly in French Indochina, especially what we call Vietnam today. There were also African and Afro-Indonesian soldiers in the Netherlands East Indies, and there were African crewmen working on various merchant vessels that traveled the South China Seas and called into Chinese ports. For China, the Second World War really began in 1937 with the Second Sino-Japanese War. It is also known as the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression. The Japanese invasion of China had already led to the relocation of the Chinese government to Nanjing in 1912, but the advance of the Japanese in 1938 led to the Chinese nationalist government moving further south to Chongqing, where it remained until 1946. On the 22nd of September 1940, Japan invaded Vichy French Indochina in an attempt to stem the flow of funds and supplies to the Kuomintang Chinese. Metropolitan French troops and soldiers from Senegal in Indochina were virtually under Japanese rule. Within hours of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941, Japan also declared war against the British Empire and the Netherlands. On the 8th of December, the Japanese attacked Thailand, forcing the country to ally with Japan. On the same day, Hong Kong was attacked. The Japanese did respect Portuguese neutrality and did not invade Macau, but held a strong grasp over the territory, where the main military force consisted of 350 soldiers from Mozambique. From Thailand, the Japanese attacked British Burma, and the fall of Burma in 1942 threatened the Chinese in Chungking, and particularly threatened the Burma Road, which you can see on this map. It also severed air links with Hanoi and the rail link, which extended from Rangoon to Mandalay and fed into the Burma Road. The British Army was engaged in Europe and North Africa, and the British and the Indian units in Burma were forced to retreat to the Burmese-Indian border. In order to continue to supply the Chinese army, the Allies constructed what was known as the Ledo Road from Assam in British India, straddling the Burmese-Chinese border into China. Work started in December 1942, and the road was built by 34,000 local Indian and Chinese workers and 15,000 American soldiers, of which approximately 60% were actually African Americans. There is no simplified map to demonstrate the activities of African soldiers or the importance of African soldiers in Burma. So military historians, please excuse this simplified map. The white line is the maximum extent of Japanese control in 1942. The dotted white line, just into India, marks the 1944 Japanese attack into India to take control of that Ledo Road and therefore stop fuel and supplies from reaching the Chinese in Yunnan province. Now, there were three major African forces involved in the defense of India and the liberation of Burma: the 11th, the 81st, and the 82nd African Divisions. The main Allied aims were to secure the border between Burma and India, to provide cover and secure the Ledo Road, and to liberate Burma by taking the airport and the port of Akyab in the south. This would allow the Allies to use their long-range American Dakota bombers over central Burma, including the city of Mandalay, and by doing so, would take the pressure off the Chinese and Chiang Kai-shek's army to the north of the country. It would also enable the Allies to move south and along the Irrawaddy River and secure the Burmese oil fields, therefore stopping the fuel supply to the Japanese. It is not possible in the time given for this presentation to go into details, but I wanted to give you some images to help provide a human dimension. The 11th East African Division on the Chinwan River, where they provided cover for the Indian forces, and you can see them on this photograph very clearly in the foreground, but also you can see some of the Indian, and I think there's a British officer as well. And the not so nice side of guerrilla warfare on the borders. This particular image is of the 81st Division. Many of these troops are from West Africa, particularly from Nigeria and Ghana. And the Arakan, which also featured many African troops from West Africa, particularly again, Nigeria, the Gold Coast of Ghana, as well as places like the Gambia. They were actually led by people such as this captain at the front of this troops movement, who were from the Free Polish Army. After the end of the war on the 15th of August 1945, the African troops in Burma were hastily shipped back to Africa. They had conducted all the required things off them in Burma. They had secured the country, they had liberated the country, and had made sure it was safe enough from the Japanese. The Japanese, meanwhile, had also, towards the end of the war, taken control of Vietnam and had actually placed most of the French administrators, including African soldiers there, into imprisonment. These were released at the end of the war, and many of these Africans went back to Africa too. In Macau, the troops from Mozambique were subsequently relieved by troops from Angola and Guinea, as well as others from Mozambique. But the French got stuck in another war against the Viet Minh. The French state turned to the tirailleurs Senegalais and the tirailleurs Algerian. When the French were finally defeated in 1954, there were 56,400 Africans in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The last of these tirailleurs left Vietnam with the French troops in September 1956. I want to move now quickly into the issue of commemoration. Evidence from colonial archives and oral history suggests that most Africans in the Burma campaign returned to British colonies and with expectations of public understandings of their experiences and their sacrifices. However, this was not the case. Moreover, their frontline experiences with European and Asian troops brought about a questioning of the colonial hierarchies that now persisted in their own homelands. Similar sentiments have been expressed by French veterans. The Portuguese continued to deploy Africans in Macau until 1975. There was little initial aim to commemorate the Africans by either the British, French, or Portuguese governments at the time. However, numerous barracks, especially in West Africa, record the names of Kaladan, Arakan, and Chindit. Burma Camp is the headquarters of the Ghana Armed Forces, and there is the Burma Barracks at Lusaka. Eventually, though, eventually through the agency of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, some recognition was assigned in Asia. This magnificent memorial bears the names of 27,000 men of the Commonwealth Land Forces for whom there is no grave. The cemetery contains the graves of only 6,374 soldiers who died in the Second World War. It is one of the most visited and highly rated war sites in Asia. And as you see, the lists of names are extensive and they're on all of those columns that you saw in the previous image. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission website allows searches for Africans that have been memorialized by name, and these correspond to the names on these columns, so you can actually look them up and find out more about them. Memorialization in Africa has been very different. Generally, Second World War memorials for those who died in Asia are not obvious or actually don't exist. In effect, this erases the memory of these distant campaigns while highlighting African theaters of war in the same war, in the Second World War. But there are some that are more obvious. For example, I go back to a previous slide, the East African Memorial in Nairobi does not include those who died in the Burma campaign, but does include the names of those 996 Africans of the 301 Field Regiment of the East African Artillery, who were on the ship the Khedive Ismail en route to Ceylon when she was attacked and sunk on the 12th of February 1944 by a Japanese submarine in the Maldives. As you can see here on the Commonwealth War Graves Commission website, it does cover those Africans that perished. The recognized value of commemoration in the creation of national identity and unity is important, and monuments open to the public at prominent localities such as this one in Freetown in Sierra Leone are popular with locals as well as tourists. but they also function as a unifying factor for the country. In the Gambia, a more recent awakening on the subject of the Second World War prompted a small but interesting exhibition at a popular tourist site with wonderful images, including ones such as this one. What's happened in Asia? Well, uh, in Asia, the African presence, apart from the one that you saw in Burma, is a little bit absent. In the case of Macau, it is, however, very much part of Macau's heritage, with monuments such as this one at the Cementerio de Nossa Senhora da Piedade, and numerous photographic images in the Military Tunnels Museum in Macau, as well as several other places. So I'm coming up to my conclusion now. Africans have been part of the Indian Ocean network for many centuries. Africans were part of globalization, which accelerated during the 18th century. Africans arrived in China in large numbers in the 20th century as a result of colonialism in Africa. Mass encounters between Africans and Chinese in this period were such that Africans were either attached to aggressors, i.e., the foe, were allies, the friend, or were neutral. Africans at China's borders came from almost every part of the continent over the 20th century. The role of these African men is increasingly recognized in Africa and Europe and in some parts of Asia, but not in the memory of China. So, how were Africans seen in China? And for that, I look to the next speaker to provide some answers. Thank you.